Hello friends, here I am with next part of this story. I hope you all like the video and subscribe to my channel. So let's start the video with summary. The three virgin goddesses created a child together with a man all three fell in love with. They all three loved the child unconditionally. This child will play a pivotal role in things to come that none would expect. He will help the child of prophecy in his role. Naruto, son of the three virgin goddesses. Book 1, The Lightning Thief. Chapter 3. Naruto had just walked onto the porch of the big house to see Grover hand Percy a cup, and watched him literally chug the whole thing. "How do you feel, Percy?" he heard Grover ask. "Like I could throw Nancy Bob off at 100 yards. was Percy's reply. "That's good," Grover said. "I don't think you could drink any more of that anyway." "What do you mean?" Percy asked him. "Well, what he means, Percy," Naruto began, causing them to jump and spin towards him, "is that is nectar, the drink of the gods. Any mortal who drinks it literally burns up from the inside out. But demigods like you and me can have small amounts like a cupful to heal us of injuries, any more though, and it will affect us just like any other mortal," he explained, causing Percy to look at him strangely and Grover to sigh. "What do you mean, drink of the gods?" Percy asked, confused. "Come on, Chiron and Mr. D are waiting," Grover said, taking Percy's empty cup and setting it down on an empty table. Grover led them into the house and then into the living room. "Mr. Brunner," was Percy's ecstatic reply when he noticed him. "Oh, Percy and Naruto, good," Mr. Brunner said. "Now we have 4 for Pinnacle," he added as he motioned them to the 2 empty chairs. "Now then, Percy, this is Mr. D. He is the camp director," Mr. Brunner said, pointing to the man opposite of him. Mr. D looked at Percy with bloodshot eyes and heaved a great sigh. "Oh, I suppose I must say it. Welcome to Camp Half-Blood. There, now don't expect me to be glad to see you," he said grouchily. Thanks," Percy said as he scooted away from Mr. D. He knew what a man looked like when he was hitting the happy juice from his time with his stepfather. If Mr. D was a stranger to alcohol, then he was a setter. "Annabeth," Mr. Brunner called, and she stepped forward. "This young lady nursed you back to health, Percy. Annabeth, could you go check on Percy's bunk in cabin 11 for me?" Mr. Brunner told Percy, then asked Annabeth. "Sure, Chiron," Annabeth said. Naruto then watched as Percy and Annabeth looked at each other for a moment and smirked. "You drool in your sleep," Annabeth finally said, causing Naruto to crack up laughing as she left. "What about you, Naruto? What are you doing here?" Percy asked angrily when Naruto finally calmed down. "Like I told you the other day, Percy, some things came up and I had to go back to the orphanage to get all my stuff together. It was to make sure I got here when you did," Naruto explained, causing Percy to look at him in shock for a moment. Then he turned back to Mr. Brunner. "So, you work here, Mr. Brunner?" Percy asked him. "Not Mr. Brunner," Chiron said. "I'm afraid that was a pseudonym. You may call me Chiron," he told Percy. "Okay," Percy said, totally confused. "And Mr. D, does that stand for something?" he asked. Everyone stopped and stared at him for a moment. On that happy note, "Chiron, I'm going to go wait outside as I know most of what you're going to talk to Percy about," Naruto said, receiving a nod from Chiron as he got up and left. A few moments later, Naruto saw Chiron walk out in his full form with Percy behind him. "Oh, Naruto, come along, there are a few more places you should see in camp that you weren't shown yesterday," Chiron said when he noticed him. Naruto nodded and followed him and Percy off the porch. As they walked, they passed the volleyball pit. Several of the campers nudged each other, and one pointed at the Minotaur horn in Percy's hand and said, "It's them." Naruto snorted in amusement at them, but saw Percy was feeling rather nervous at all their stares. "Don't worry about them, Percy," Naruto said, placing his hand on Percy's shoulder. Percy relaxed a little and smiled at Naruto gratefully. Naruto saw Percy look back towards the big house and then turn towards Chiron. "What's up there?" Percy asked, pointing to the top front window. "Just the attic," Chiron said, his smile fading as he looked where Percy was pointing. "Somebody lives there?" Percy asked him. "No, not one living thing," Chiron said with finality. "Nothing living, huh?" Naruto thought to himself. "Come along, you two, there's still lots to see," Chiron said, his light-hearted tone coming out a little forced. They walked through the camp strawberry fields, watching campers collect them while satyrs were here with their playing their reed pipes. Chiron told them that they use the strawberry fields to pay for the camp's expenses through export to businesses in New York and on Mount Olympus. He also told them that it took no effort to grow them as Mr. D had the effect of making fruit-bearing plants grow like crazy. Grover won't get into too much trouble, will he? Percy asked Chiron. I mean, he was a good protector, really, he added after a moment. Chiron sighed and shed his tweed jacket, draping it of his horseback like a saddle. Grover has big dreams, Percy, perhaps bigger than reasonable. To reach his goal, he must first prove great courage by succeeding as a keeper, finding a camper and bringing him safely to Half-Blood Hill. But he did that, Percy shouted. I might agree with you, Chiron said, but it is not my place to judge. Dionysus and the Council of Cloven Elders must decide. I'm afraid they may not see this assignment as a success. After all, Grover lost you in New York. Then there's the unfortunate fate of your mother. Also the fact that Grover was unconscious when you dragged him over the property line, and Naruto was the one to kill the Minotaur. The council might question whether this shows any courage on Grover's part. Naruto could tell that Percy wanted to protest, and that he felt guilty about giving Grover the slip. He'll get a second chance, won't he? Percy asked hopefully. Chiron winced. I'm afraid that was Grover's second chance, Percy. The council was not anxious to give him another either, after what happened the first time 5 years ago. Olympus knows. I advised him to wait longer before trying again. He is still so small for his age. How old is he? Naruto asked, entering the conversation. Oh, 28, Chiron answered. What? And he's in 6th grade? Percy asked unbelievingly. Satyrs mature half as fast as humans, Percy. Naruto. Grover has been the equivalent of a middle school student for the past 6 years, Chiron explained. Well, that's interesting, Naruto mumbled. That's horrible, Percy said, imagining having to be in the same grade for that long. Quite, Chiron agreed. At any rate, Grover is a late bloomer, even by Satyr standards, and not yet very accomplished at woodland magic. Alas, he was anxious to pursue his dream. Perhaps now he will find some other career. That's not fair, Percy said. What happened the first time? Was it really so bad? Chiron looked away quickly. Naruto saw a sad look on his face and noticed he was looking at the tree on the boundary line. Let's move along, shall we? Chiron said, walking ahead with them following. Chiron, Percy said. If the gods and Olympus and all that are real, yes, child? Chiron asked, looking at him. Does that mean the underworld is real too? Percy asked him. Chiron's expression darkened. Yes, child. He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. There is a place where spirits go after death. But for now, until we know more, I would urge you to put that out of your mind. What do you mean, until we know more? Percy asked. Come, Percy, Naruto, let's see the woods, Chiron said, as if he didn't hear him. As they got closer, Percy and Naruto noticed how huge the forest was. It looked ancient, and took up at least a quarter of the valley they were in. It had tall, thick trees that were close together, and looked like no one had been inside since the Native Americans. The woods are stocked, if you care to try your luck, but go armed, Chiron said. Stocked with what? Percy asked. Armed with what? You'll see. Capture the flag is Friday night. Do you have your own sword and shield? Chiron said, then asked them both. I don't use shields, but I do have my own sword, and my own bow and arrow, Naruto said, pointing to his necklace, then pulling out his Zippo. Chiron nodded, then turned to Percy. My own what? Percy asked, shocked. No, Chiron said. I don't suppose you do. I think a size 5 will do. I visit the armory later, Chiron said thoughtfully. Chiron turned around to continue the tour when Naruto spoke up. Chiron, I have already seen the rest yesterday. I'll be at the cabins when you get done, Naruto said, receiving a nod from Chiron as he walked off after patting Percy on the shoulder once more. An hour later, Percy and Chiron walked into the center of the cabins and saw that Naruto and Annabeth were having a discussion over the books they were holding in front of the 11th cabin. As they reached them, they turned around, and Annabeth looked Percy over critically. Naruto smirked as he noticed it. Annabeth, Chiron said. I have master's archery class at noon. Take Percy from here. Yes, sir, Annabeth said. Cabin 11, Chiron told Percy, gesturing towards the doorway of the cabin. Make yourself at home. He then left them. Well, Percy, let's go introduce you to your cabin mates. Seeing as Naruto met them yesterday, Annabeth said as she turned towards the door of the cabin. They looked inside of the cabin. Out of all the cabins it looked the most like a regular old summer camp cabin, with emphasis on the old. The threshold was worn down, and the brown paint was peeling. Over the doorway was one of those doctor's symbols, a winged pole with 2 snakes wrapped around it. Inside, it was packed with people, both boys and girls, way more people than there were bunk beds. Sleeping bags spread all over on the floor. It looked like a gym where the Red Cross had set up an evacuation center. Percy stood in the doorway beside Naruto, watching as he waved at a few of them who waved back. But most of them were staring at him. Well, Annabeth said go on. Percy entered into the cabin and tripped coming in the door making a total fool of himself. Good impression, Percy? Naruto said cheekily, getting a few snickers from the campers. He and Annabeth then walked inside. Percy Jackson me cabin 11, Annabeth said. Regular or undetermined? Somebody asked. He is undetermined just like me guys, Naruto said, and everybody groaned. A guy who looked around 19 with sandy blonde hair and mischievous eyes stepped forward. Now guys, that's what we're here for. Welcome, Percy. You can have that spot on the floor right over there, next to where Naruto's is, he said with a kind smile, though it was kind of marred a little by the scar that ran from his right eye all the way down to his jaw. This is Luke, Annabeth said, and her voice sounded different somehow. Naruto just smirked, noticing her blush, while Percy glanced at her. She noticed him looking at her and her expression hardened again. He's your counselor for now. For now? Percy asked, confused. You're undetermined, Luke explained patiently. They don't know what cabin to put you two in, so you're here. Cabin 11 takes all newcomers, all visitors. Naturally, we would. Hermes, our patron, is the god of travelers. Naruto noticed Percy look at his spot on the floor, then the minotaur horn in his hand, then shake his head a little. Naruto guessed he was going to mark his spot with it, but then remembered that Hermes was also the god of thieves. How long will I be here? Percy asked. Good question, Luke said. Until you're determined. How long will that take? Percy asked. All the campers laughed. It could take a long time, Percy, Naruto said, smirking at him. Come on, Annabeth told Percy. I still need to tell you about the rest of the cabins. Alright, I'm coming, Percy said with Naruto following them. Once they were outside and a few feet away, Annabeth turned to Percy. Jackson, you have to do better than that, she said. What? Percy asked, causing Naruto to shake his head at him. Annabeth rolled her eyes and mumbled under her breath. I can't believe I thought you were the one. What's your problem? Percy asked in an angry tone. All I know is, I fought some bull guy, and one more thing, and it was Naruto that killed him. Don't talk like that, Annabeth said. Do you know how many kids at this camp wish they had your chance to get killed? Percy asked, still angry. To fight the Minotaur. What do you think we train for? She asked him sarcastically. Percy shook his head. Look, if the thing I fought really was the Minotaur, the same one in the stories, yes, she said. Then there's only one, Percy said. Yes, Annabeth said. And he died, like, a gazillion years ago, right? Theseus killed him in the labyrinth. So Percy said. Monsters don't die, Percy. They can be killed, but they don't die, Naruto said, finally speaking, causing Percy to look at him. They don't have souls. You can dispel them for a while, maybe a whole lifetime if you're lucky. But they are primal forces, archetypes. Eventually they reform. What? Percy said, disbelief coloring his voice. I mean your math teacher, she is still out there, Annabeth said, causing Naruto to look at her with a raised eyebrow, wondering how she knew about that, while Percy looked at her in shock. How did you know about Mrs. Dodds? Percy asked. You talk in your sleep, Annabeth said, causing Naruto to snicker. You almost called her something. A fairy? They're Hades' torturers, right? Annabeth glanced at the ground nervously, as if she expected it to open up and swallow her. You shouldn't call them by name, even here. We call them the kindly ones, if we have to speak of them at all. Look, is there anything we can say without it thundering? Percy asked. And why do I have to stay in cabin 11 anyway? Why is everybody so crowded together? There are plenty of empty bunks right over there. Percy fired off, then pointed at the first few cabins. Go ahead and try to use them, Percy. I guarantee you won't make it through the doors of any of them, Naruto said seriously while Annabeth turned pale at his question. What he means is you don't just choose a cabin, Percy. It depends on who your parents are, or your parent. Annabeth said. My mom is Sally Jackson, Percy said. She works at the candy store in Grand Central Station. At least, she used to. I'm sorry about your mom, Percy. But that's not what I mean. I'm talking about your other parent, your dad. Annabeth said. He's dead. I never knew him, Percy said. Your father's not dead, Percy. Naruto said. Percy looked confused. What do you mean, Naruto? Your father is a god. Naruto said. What? Percy asked in shock. How else would you be allowed here? You are a demigod, Percy. Naruto said. How do I know I am a demigod as they are called? Percy asked. Usually, demigods are diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD. Annabeth said. How does dyslexia and ADHD help? Percy asked. Well, for one, Percy, the reason why we have dyslexia is because as the child of a god or goddess, our brains are programmed to read ancient Greek and Latin. Naruto said. And the ADHD, how does it help? Percy asked them. ADHD is your battlefield reflexes. In a real fight, they'd keep you alive. As for the attention problems, that's because you see too much, Percy, not too little. Your senses are better than a regular mortal's. Then there is Annabeth said. She wanted to say more but was interrupted by someone very familiar to her and Naruto, which caused Naruto to shake his head. He just knew Percy was going to say something stupid to her, with his habit of speaking without thinking first. Well? A newbie. The familiar voice said. They looked towards the voice's direction. They saw Clarice with two of her siblings. Clarice, Annabeth sighed. Why don't you go polish your spear or something? She asked sarcastically. Sure, Miss Princess. So I can run you through with it Friday night, Clarice said. Eris Korakas. Annabeth said, which in Greek was go to the crows. You don't stand a chance. We'll pulverize you. Clarice said, but her eye twitched. Perhaps she wasn't sure she could follow through on a threat. She turned towards Naruto. Hello, Clarice, how's Salina? Naruto asked her while smirking. Hello, Naruto, she's good. She's hanging out with some of her siblings right now. Clarice said in a neutral tone. She turned to Percy. Who's this little runt with you? She asked. Percy Jackson, Naruto said. Meet Clarice, daughter of Ares. Percy blinked. Like the war god? He asked. Clarice sneered. You got a problem with that? She asked. No, Percy said, recovering his wits. It explains the bad smell, he said, causing Naruto to facepalm at his words. We have an initiation ceremony for newbies, Percy. Clarice growled out. Percy, he corrected. Whatever. Come on, I'll show you, Clarice said. Clarice Annabeth tried to say. Stay out of this, wise girl, Clarice said. Before Percy could do anything, Clarice grabbed him in a headlock and started dragging him towards the bathroom. He dropped his minotaur horn in the process, and Annabeth grabbed it up for him. She then turned to Naruto about to say something before he interrupted. Don't ask, I'm not going to stop this. Percy needs to understand that he can't always say the first thing that comes out of his mouth, and that he needs to think before he speaks, Naruto said, earning a nod from Annabeth. Percy was kicking and punching, but to no avail. Clarice had a grit like iron. She dragged him into the girls' bathroom. There was a line of toilet stalls on one side and shower stalls on the other. It smelled just like any other public bathroom. Clarice's friends were laughing. Percy had tried to find the strength he had used when he fought the Minotaur, but it just wasn't there. Like he's Big 3 material, Clarice said as she pushed him towards one of the toilets. Yeah, right. The Minotaur probably fell over laughing, because of how stupid looking he was. One of her friends snickered out. Naruto and Annabeth stood in the doorway of the bathroom watching. Naruto kept his hand on Annabeth's shoulder to keep her from interfering. Clarice and her friends forced Percy to his knees, and Clarice began to push his head towards the toilet. Percy began to struggle like crazy. They heard the plumbing rumble. and saw the pipes shudder. Clarice's friends backed up and her grip loosened on Percy's hair. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he saw the water begin to move, and he grabbed Annabeth before diving out of the bathroom door. At that exact moment Clarice and her friends were blasted out of the bathroom by a huge torrent of water, before it suddenly stopped. Percy walked out of the bathroom to see Clarice and her friends spread out on the ground dripping wet, and saw Naruto helping Annabeth up from the ground. "You're dead, new boy. You are totally dead," Clarice said with a look of absolute hatred on her face. "You want to?" Percy began before Naruto covered his mouth with his hand. "Shut up, Percy, you have a big mouth," Naruto said. "And if you keep using it without thinking you'll end up getting yourself killed," he added, causing Percy to look away for a moment. He then looked towards Clarice. "Clarice," Naruto called. She looked towards him. "Go get yourself cleaned up in your cabin. We don't need another mess right now." Clarice nodded, and she and her friends took off to their cabin. He then removed his hand from Percy's mouth. "What?" Percy snapped, noticing Annabeth staring at him. "How did you do that?" Annabeth asked him. "I don't know." Percy told her truthfully. "What are you thinking, Annabeth?" Naruto asked her, noticing her thoughtful look. "I'm thinking that I want both of you on my team for Capture the Flag," Annabeth said. Naruto had grinned at her words. "Alright then, well I have something I need to do, and you need to show Percy the rest of the camp," Naruto said as he began to walk off. "Alright, talk to you later, Naruto," Annabeth said, waving goodbye. "Yeah, see ya, man," Percy said, also waving. Naruto headed off to the Hephaestus cabin's workshop. He had something he thought they might be interested in. As he walked into the workshop he saw many kids working on many weapons and armor, all in various stages of completion. "Hello, who are you?" a deep voice from the left of him asked. Naruto turned and saw a huge guy looking at him from one of the workbenches. "I'm Naruto Namikaze. Nice to meet you," Naruto said, walking up to him and holding out his hand to him. "Charles Beckendorf, what brings you here?" Charles asked as he shook his hand. "Well, I had this blueprint I made on a two-way low-frequency radio headset that I thought I could get to work for demigods by using celestial bronze as a casing for the machinery," Naruto said, piquing Charles' interest. "Okay, and how does that bring you here?" Charles asked, interested in his answer. "Well, I was hoping I could get the help of Hephaestus's children in making enough for the campers, and we could test it out at Friday's Capture the Flag game, with Chiron telling me whether it broadcasts our location or not, like usual electronic devices do," Naruto said, getting a look of understanding from Charles. "Well, as the head counselor for our cabin, I'll see what I can do. Just leave the blueprints with me and I will get it done," Charles said, grinning while holding his hand out for the blueprints. "I can't wait to see the end result for them. Good luck," Naruto said as he handed over the blueprints and began to leave. Charles was already focused on the blueprints by the time Naruto left. Naruto headed towards the lake after leaving the workshop and saw Percy and Annabeth deep in conversation on the pier and headed their way. "Then who's your dad?" he heard Percy ask once he was in hearing distance of them. Naruto saw Annabeth stiffen at the question, and shook his head at Percy sadly. "My dad is a professor at West Point," she said. "I haven't seen him in a long time. He teaches American history." "He's human?" Percy asked, shock causing Naruto to shake his head sadly at him again for the way he thought. "What? You assume it has to be a male god who finds a female attractive? How sexist is that?" Annabeth stated, upset. "Yeah, Percy, I thought you already understood the point that goddesses also did this stuff when I told you about the gifts my mom let me, remember?" Naruto said, causing them to turn to him, shocked he was there before Percy nodded to him, remembering that conversation. "Yeah, I remember. So your mom is a goddess?" Percy asked. "Well, my moms are goddesses," Naruto said, shocking them. "What do you mean moms?" Annabeth asked. "Well, from what Stephanie told me, I know that 3 of the goddesses used some sort of ritual involving theirs and my father's blood to make me," Naruto said, causing Annabeth to nod in understanding, while Percy looked at him confused for a second, before shaking his head and turning to Annabeth. "Well, who's your mom then?" he asked her. "Cabin 6. Annabeth stated. "Meaning?" Percy asked her. Annabeth straightened. "Athena, goddess of wisdom and battle." Percy looked at her skeptically for a second. "And my dad?" he asked her. "Undetermined," Annabeth stated. "Like I told you before, no one knows, except my mom." She knew. Percy said. Maybe not, Percy. Gods don't always reveal their identities. Annabeth said, looking at him and Naruto. My dad would have. He loved her. Percy stated, sure of the fact. Annabeth gave Naruto a cautious look and he nodded to her, causing her to sigh. Maybe you're right, Percy. Maybe he'll send a sign. That's the only way to know. Your father has to send a sign claiming you as his son. Sometimes it happens. You mean sometimes it doesn't? Percy asked, shocked. Naruto sighed. The gods are busy people, Percy. They have lots of kids and they don't always, well, sometimes they don't care about us, Percy. They ignore us. He said sadly. He could see Percy in deep thought for a moment at that. So I'm stuck here, Percy said. That's it, for the rest of my life. It depends, Naruto said. Some demigods can get by with just a few months of training, and spend the rest of the time in the mortal world. In their cases, they're just not strong or important enough for most monsters to focus on. But for some of us, it's too dangerous to leave. We're year-rounders. In the mortal world, we attract monsters. They sense us, and come to challenge us. Most of the time, they'll ignore us until we're old enough to cause trouble, about 10 or 11 years old. But after that, most demigods either make their way here, or get killed off. A few manage to make it in the outside world and become famous. Believe me, if I told you their names, you would know them. Some don't even realize they're demigods. But very, very few are like that, Annabeth told him. About monsters they can't get in here? Percy asked her. Annabeth shook her head. Not unless they're intentionally stalked in the woods or are summoned by somebody on the inside. Why would anyone want to summon a monster? Percy asked. To use for practice fights or practical jokes, Naruto said with a shrug. What do you mean practical jokes? Percy asked him. Not now, Percy. I'll explain later, Naruto said after receiving a look from Annabeth. The borders are sealed to keep mortals and monsters out. From the outside a mortal would look in and see nothing unusual, but a big strawberry farm, Annabeth told them. So you're a year-rounder? Percy asked Annabeth. Annabeth nodded. From under the collar of her t-shirt she pulled a leather necklace with 5 clay beads of different colors. It was just like others they had seen, except Annabeth's also had a big gold ring strung on it, like a college ring. I've been here since I was 7, she said. Every August, on the last day of the summer session, every camper gets a bead for surviving another year. I've been here longer than most of the counselors, and they're in college. Why did you come so young? Percy asked, causing Naruto to shake his head again, and add tact to the list of things Percy needed to learn. Annabeth twisted the ring on her necklace. None of your business, she snapped at him. Percy, Naruto said. You can't question people on their personal life. Annabeth gave him a grateful look, to which he nodded. Oh, sorry, Percy said. He stood there in silence for a moment. So I could just walk out of here right now if I wanted to? Percy asked her. It would be suicide, but you could, with Mr. D or Chiron's permission. But they wouldn't give permission until the end of the summer session, unless, Annabeth said, trailing off at the end. Unless what? Naruto asked her, though he had a clue as to what it was. You were granted a quest. But that hardly even happens. The last time her voice trailed off again. Both Percy and Naruto could tell from her tone that the last time hadn't gone so well. Back in the sick room, Percy said. When you were feeding me that stuff. Ambrosia, Annabeth supplied for him. Yeah, you asked me something about the summer solstice, Percy said. Annabeth's shoulders tensed. So you do know something? Well, no. Back at school, me and Naruto overheard Grover and Chiron talking about it. Grover mentioned the summer solstice. He said something about we didn't have much time, because of the deadline. What did that mean? Percy explained, then asked her. Annabeth clenched her fists. I wish I knew. Chiron and the satyrs, they know, but they won't tell me. Something is wrong on Olympus, something pretty major. Last time I was there, everything seemed so normal. You've been to Olympus? Percy asked, shocked. Some of us year-rounders, Luke, Clarice, and I and a few others, we took a field trip during the winter solstice. That's when the gods have their big annual council, she said. How did you get there? Naruto asked her, intrigued. The Long Island Railroad, of course. You get off at Penn Station, Empire State Building, special elevator to the 600th floor, she explained. She then looked at them like they should have known already. You are a New Yorker, right? She asked them. Oh, sure, Percy said while Naruto rolled his eyes. Right after we visited, Annabeth continued, the weather got weird, as if the gods were fighting. A couple of times since, I've overheard satyrs talking. The best I can figure out is that something important was stolen. And if it isn't returned by the summer solstice, there's going to be trouble. When you two came, I was hoping Athena can get along with just about anybody, except for Ares. And of course she's got the rivalry with Poseidon. But, aside from that, I thought we could work together. I thought you might know something. Percy and Naruto shook their heads. I've got to get a quest, Annabeth muttered to herself. I'm not too young if they would just tell me the problem later on. Naruto was back in cabin 11 talking and joking around with the others, while keeping an eye on Percy who was sitting in a corner looking kinda down. He watched as Luke walked up to Percy with some toiletries and began talking to him. He kept his eyes on them during the entire conversation until he heard a horn blowing in the distance. Cabin 11 fall in. He heard Luke shout. The whole of cabin 11, about 28 kids, filed into the courtyard. They lined up in order of seniority, so of course Percy and Naruto were last in line. Campers came from the other cabins except for the first 3, and cabin 8, which had looked normal during the daytime, but was now glowing silver as the sun went down. Naruto's eyes lingered on it for a moment, then moved to cabin 6 and lingered there for a moment too. He had felt some kind of pull to the 2 cabins but it was faint so he brushed it off. They marched off to the dining pavilion. Satyrs, naiads, and nymphs started joining them from different parts of the camp. In all there were about 100 campers, a few dozen satyrs, and a dozen assorted nymphs and naiads. At the pavilion, torches blazed around the marble stone columns. A central fire burned in a bronze brazier the size of a bathtub. Each cabin had its own table, covered in white cloth trimmed in purple. 4 of the tables were empty, but cabin 11's was way overcrowded. Percy and Naruto sat near the edge of the bench. They saw Grover sitting at table 12 with Mr. D, and a couple of plump blonde boys who looked just like Mr. D. Chiron stood to one side, the picnic table being way too small for a centaur. Annabeth sat at table 6 with a bunch of serious-looking athletic kids, all with her gray eyes and honey blonde hair. Clara sat at table 5. She'd apparently gotten over being hosed down, because she was laughing and belching right along with the rest of her siblings. Finally, Chiron pounded his hoof upon the marble floor of the pavilion, and everybody fell silent. He raised his glass. To the gods, he bellowed. Everybody else raised their glasses including Naruto and Percy and bellowed back. To the gods. Wood nymphs came forward carrying platters of food, grapes, apples, strawberries, cheese, bread, and barbecue. Naruto called out what drink he wanted to his cup and watched it fill up. Noticing Percy watch then copy him. Here you go Percy, Naruto, Luke said handing them a big platter of barbecue. Both of them then began loading their plates full, with a little of everything on the table. It's time to give our burnt offerings to the gods Percy, come on, Naruto said. What do you mean burnt offerings? Percy asked him. Naruto just pointed to the brazier and Percy noticed the other campers putting a small portion of their meal into the fire. They got in line behind Luke and watched him make his offering while muttering, Hermes. Naruto was next. Whoever you 3 are please claim me soon. Naruto thought as he dropped 2 rolls and some grapes in the fire. As he was lifting his head up Naruto could have sworn he saw 3 smiling faces in the flames, and just smiled back. He then stepped back and waited for Percy to make his offering before heading back to his seat with him. When everybody had returned to their seats and finished eating their meals, Chiron stomped his hoof again for attention. Mr. D got up with a sigh. Yes, I suppose I'd better say hello to all you brats. Well, hello. Our activities director, Chiron, says the next capture the flag is Friday. Cabin 5 presently hold the laurels. A bunch of cheering went up from Cabin 5's table. Personally, Mr. D continued, I could care less, but congratulations. Also, I should tell you that we have 2 new campers today. Perry Wilson. Chiron murmured something to him. Percy Jackson, Mr. D corrected. And Naruto Namikaze. Now run along to your silly campfire. Go on. Everybody cheered. They all headed down toward the amphitheater, where Apollo's cabin let us sing along. They sang camp songs about gods and ate summers, and joked around, and the funny thing was that Percy didn't feel that anyone was staring at him anymore. He felt like he was home. "Naruto, I feel like I am home," Percy said, turning to him. Naruto just nodded his head with a smile on his face at that. Naruto, Son of the Three Virgin Goddesses, Book 1, The Lightning Thief, Chapter 4. Within the next few days, Naruto and Percy settled into a routine that felt almost normal. They were getting lessons from satyrs, nymphs, and a centaur. Each morning Percy and Naruto took ancient Greek from Annabeth, where she learned. Naruto already knew both Greek and Latin as well as English. They talked about the gods and goddesses in present tense, which was weird for Percy. The rest of the day they rotated through outdoor activities, looking for something they were good at. Chiron had them line up for archery first, and they quickly found out that Percy was no good with a bow and arrow. While Naruto, he surprised everybody. "Hey Chiron, how far back can we move the targets on the range? Because as you know, I have been using a bow for a while and I want to test my limit," Naruto asked him. Chiron paused in thought for a moment. "Well, we can move the targets back about 1,000 yards, but I've only ever seen the twins Apollo and Artemis hit a mark at that range," Chiron told him. "Excellent," Naruto said. "I would like to try at that range. The last range I was at only went to 700 yards. Okay, if you want, just don't be discouraged if you miss," Chiron said, and moved Naruto's target for him, getting everyone's attention. "Not possible," Naruto heard some of the Apollo campers say. "Okay Naruto, take your shot," Chiron said when he returned to Naruto's side. Naruto knocked his bow and lined up his shot. He closed his eyes for a moment to calm his body down, entering an almost meditative state. Chiron noticed and smirked, wondering if Naruto would actually make the shot in his current state. Naruto opened his eyes and took in a breath, then released it at the same time he let the arrow fly. Then with quickness Chiron barely saw drew another arrow and fired it as well. Everyone watched as the two arrows flew, the first embedding itself dead center in the target with the second splitting it straight down the center. Everyone gasped in shock at the amazing skill Naruto had just showed, and Chiron's eyes widened. "Well Naruto, it seems you have very good archery skills to match the twins," Chiron said. "Hey, he could be a sibling of ours," one of the Apollo campers said excitedly. "Sorry to disappoint guys, but my Olympian parent is female," Naruto told them. After that they moved on to foot racing. Neither Percy or Naruto were very good at that. The wood nymph instructors had left them in the dust. They said not to worry about it, as they had excellent practice running away from love's gods. But both were still put out at being beaten in a race by a tree. Wrestling was next. Naruto was better at this than Percy, mainly because every time Percy stepped onto the mat Clarus would pulverize him. He had just given up after the first 3 times, and just watched Naruto continue the class. Then they had canoeing. It was the only class they had so far that Percy was better than Naruto at. But that didn't encourage Percy, as he didn't see that as a skill to be proud of. Both of them knew that the senior campers and counselors were watching them, trying to figure out who their parents were. But they weren't having an easy time figuring it out for either of them. "Man Naruto, how are you so good at all the combat-oriented classes?" Percy asked him sadly. "Don't be sad Percy, I just have a little more experience that you do. You're doing well for your first time," Naruto said encouragingly, getting Percy to smile. "Thanks man," Percy said. "No problem, what's next on the schedule?" Naruto asked him. "We have our first sword fighting lesson," Percy told him. "Oh, cool," Naruto said. Everybody from Cabin 11 gathered in the sword fighting arena, where Luke was the instructor. He had everybody start off with basic sword maneuvers, using some straw-filled dummies with Greek armor. At first everyone just stared at Naruto as he used a Japanese katana and did different maneuvers than Luke was telling them to do. "What are you doing Naruto?" one of the campers asked him. "Well, I've been trained in Kenjutsu since I was little, since it was the style my clear-sighted father used. So I'm doing the basic maneuvers for my style," Naruto said, gaining a nod from them. After that everyone went back to doing the maneuvers. Naruto noticed Percy was doing okay in the maneuvers, but also noticed that he couldn't find a blade balanced enough for him. "Okay everyone, before we begin dueling in pairs, I'm going to test Naruto's style to see if he needs to continue training with us. If not, then he will use this time to train more in his own style," Luke explained as he led Naruto to the center of the arena with everyone watching on. "Good luck," one of the campers told Naruto. Luke is the best swordsman in the last 100 years. Naruto just smirked. Good, that means I'll be able to enjoy this fight, he said, getting into his stance. Luke mirrored Naruto and got into his own stance. They stared each other down for a moment, before Luke suddenly lunged at Naruto, bringing his sword down in a diagonal arch, aiming to cut Naruto from his right shoulder to his left hip. Naruto nimbly dodged his attack to the left and appeared inside Luke's guard, bringing his katana up in a backwards grip, aiming to cut him cleanly from left to right. Luke's eyes widened and he jumped away from Naruto, landing a few feet away. He slid back into his stance and waited for Naruto's next move. Naruto obliged by charging Luke, appearing to be preparing an overhead strike. Luke immediately brought up his blade to block it. Naruto smirked and showed his strike was a feint when his attack suddenly changed course to a path where it would cleave Luke's head off. Luke's eyes widened, realizing he had no time to block, and flinched when Naruto's blade stopped inches from his throat. Well, it appears I have one, Naruto said while keeping his eyes on Luke and his sword at his throat. Luke nodded, showing he conceded, and Naruto removed his blade. Everyone else was amazed at the outcome of the fight and began whispering to each other. Wow, Naruto, you're really good with that style of yours, and you understood one of the main rules of combat: never let your guard down till your opponent concedes defeat. Good job, Luke said, grinning. Thanks, I've trained hard to reach this level, Naruto said, also grinning. Well, like I said, you can practice on your style here at this time every day from now on, Luke said, getting a nod from Naruto, who moved to a corner of the arena and began practicing some moves he was trying to perfect. Alright everyone, get into pairs. I'll pair up with Percy since this is his first time, Luke said, causing everyone to break up into pairs. Alright, start practicing, he called as he turned to Percy. For the rest of the time they all practiced their fighting skills in pairs, with Luke teaching Percy many different moves he could use with a sword. The next day Naruto decided to get to know Claris and Selena better, seeing as they were some of the first people he had met after coming here. He found them hanging around outside the camp store drinking sodas. Hey Claris, Selena, what's up? Naruto said, walking up to them. Oh, hey Naruto, Selena said, and Claris nodded to him with a grunt. What brings you here? Not trying to keep me from beating up Percy, are you? Claris asked, causing Naruto to laugh. That's a good one, Claris. But no, I'm not. He needs to learn to either think before he speaks or just keep his mouth shut, Naruto said, getting a smirk from Claris. Then why are you over here, Naruto? Selena asked after a moment of silence. Well, I thought I would get to know you two better, seeing as you girls were one of the first few people I meet, and you showed me around and all, Naruto said, getting a nod from Claris and a blushing nod from Selena. Well then sit down, I don't have a problem getting to know you better, Naruto. You're actually pretty cool, Claris said, gesturing to the seat across from them. Yeah, go ahead, Naruto, Selena said after her blush died down. Naruto nodded and sat down before smirking at Claris. Yeah, you don't have a problem with me, it's Percy, right, and his bathroom incident, Naruto said, causing Claris to growl and Selena to break out giggling. Yeah, I hate that brat for that, and I'm going to get him back, Claris said angrily. Well, go ahead, like I said before, he needs to learn. Just don't hurt him too much, okay? Naruto said while grinning. Oh, I won't hurt him too much, just enough to get my point across, Claris said, snickering, causing Selena to look at her. You really going through with that plan of yours, Claris? Selena asked her. Yeah, I mean it's not like it will kill him, Claris said nonchalantly. What plan? Naruto asked her curiously. Oh, Claris just plans to separate Percy from his team and attack him using her spear she got from her dad, and then probably humiliate him in some way, Selena told him, getting a nod from Claris. Okay, this spear of yours sounds interesting. What's the deal with it? Naruto asked her. Claris's eyes actually lit up at his question. It's a magical spear my dad gave me a few years back that electrocutes my opponents if I touch or stab them with a blade, and I can control how much it electrocutes them, Claris said in a happy tone. Wow, that sounds really cool. You must really love that spear, Naruto said, getting a happy nod from Claris and a giggle from Selena. Oh, she does. She polishes and sharpens it every day, even when she doesn't use it, Selena said. After that they sat in a comfortable silence, drinking their drinks and watching the rest of the camp scurry around doing whatever. So, how did you two meet and become friends? Naruto asked, causing them to look at him and smile in remembrance. It's actually a pretty funny story, Clarice said, getting a half of annoyance from Silena. Yeah, for you, Silena said, causing Clarice to laugh. Anyway, as I was saying, we both came to camp around the same time, and were claimed by our parents rather quickly, Clarice said. Yeah, but after I was claimed, I started getting picked on by some of the girls and hit on by some of the boys, Silena said, disdainfully, showing Naruto that she hated that time. Well, one day I was walking around camp and I heard a noise, so I went to investigate it. I found Silena on the ground surrounded by girls that had been hitting her and calling her names, and jumped in to help her, Clarice continued. Yeah, she came out of nowhere like a charging rhino and took out half the group in one go, and that scared off the rest, Silena said. After they were gone, I had helped her up and made sure she was okay. Then I offered to help teach her how to defend herself, and actually fight in battle, Clarice said. I agreed to her help, and we have been friends ever since, Silena said, smiling, causing Clarice to smile as well. Wow, that is a pretty epic way to start a friendship, Naruto said, causing them to burst out laughing. For the rest of that day, Naruto hung out with Clarice and Silena, getting to know them better, and by the time Friday came they were all three happy to say they were good friends. Friday afternoon, Naruto was resting with Percy and Grover at the lake, after Percy had had a near-death experience on the climbing wall. Percy had almost been burnt by the lava. His shirt was still smoking from where it had burned holes in it, and his arms had no hair left. They sat on the pier, watching the Nads weave baskets underwater. How did your conversation go with Mr. D? Percy asked Grover. Fine, just great, Grover said, his face turning a sickly white. So you can still do your career you chose? Naruto asked him. Chiron told you I wanted a searcher's license? Grover asked, looking at them nervously. Well, no, Percy said. He just told us you had big plans for the future, and that you needed credit for completing a keeper's assignment. So did you get it? Grover looked down at the Nads. D suspended judgment. He said I hadn't failed or succeeded with you yet, so our fates were still tied together. If you got a quest and I went along to protect you, and we both came back alive, then maybe he'd consider the job complete. Well, that's not so bad, right? Percy asked, his spirits lifted. Blahaha. He might as well have transferred me to stable cleaning duties. The chances of you getting a quest, and even if you did, why would you want me along? Of course I'd want you along, Percy said. Grover stared glumly into the water. Basket weaving must be nice to have a useful skill. Percy tried to reassure Grover, but it just made him sadder. Stop the pity party, Grover. If you want to succeed you have to believe you can, because in the end people's opinions don't matter. They will eventually see the way you see yourself, Naruto said, lifting Grover's spirits, and causing him to smile a little. After that they talked for a while about different things. Eventually Percy asked Grover about the 4 empty cabins. Number 8, the silver one, belongs to Artemis, Grover said. She vowed to remain a virgin forever, so of course no kids. The cabin is, you know, honorary. If she didn't have one, she would be mad. Yeah, okay. But what about the other 3, the ones at the end? Are they the big 3? Percy asked. No, one of them, number 2, is Hera's, Grover said, tense. That's another honorary thing. She's the goddess of marriage, so of course she wouldn't go around having affairs with mortals. That's her husband's job. When we say the big 3, we mean the 3 powerful brothers, the sons of Kronos, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, Naruto said, listing their names. Grover nodded. Right, you know. After the great battle with the Titans, they took over the world from their dad and drew lots to decide who got what. Zeus got the sky, Naruto said. Poseidon got the sea, and Hades got the underworld. Yep, correct, Grover said. But Hades doesn't have a cabin here? Percy asked. No, he doesn't have a throne on Olympus either. He sort of does his own thing down in the underworld. If he did have a cabin here, Grover shuddered. Well, it wouldn't be pleasant, let's leave it at that. But Zeus and Poseidon, they both had, like, billions of kids in the myths. Why are their cabins empty? Percy asked. Well, about 60 years ago, after World War II, the big 3 agreed they wouldn't sire any more heroes. Their children were just too powerful. They were affecting the course of human events too much, causing too much carnage. World War II, you know, that was basically a fight between Zeus and Poseidon's kids on one side, and Hades' kids on the other. The winning side, Zeus and Poseidon, made Hades swear an oath by them, no more affairs with mortal women. They all swore on the river Styx. Naruto said, "How did you know that?" Grover asked Naruto, surprised. "Hello, raised in orphanage by a demigod, that is protected from monsters," Naruto said in a deadpan tone, earning a look of understanding from Grover. "That's the most serious oath you can make," Percy said. Grover nodded. "And the brothers kept their word, no kids?" he asked. Grover's face darkened. 17 years ago, Zeus fell off the wagon. There was this TV starlet with a big fluffy 80s hairdo. He just couldn't help himself. When their child was born, a little girl named Thalia, well, the river Styx is serious about O's mad on it. Zeus himself got off easy because he's immortal, but he brought a terrible fate on his daughter. "But that isn't fair. It wasn't the little girl's fault," Percy said. Grover hesitated. "Percy, children of the big three have powers greater than other half-bloods. They have a strong aura, a scent that attracts monsters. When Hades found out about the girl, he wasn't too happy about Zeus breaking his oath. Hades let the worst monsters out of Tartarus to torment Thalia. A satyr was assigned to her when she was 12, but there was nothing he could do. He tried to escort her here with a couple of half-bloods she'd befriended. They almost made it. They got all the way to the top of that hill." He pointed to the top of the hill across the valley, to the one where they fought the Minotaur. "All three kindly ones were after them, and a horde of hellhounds. They were about to be overrun when Thalia told her satyr to take the other two to safety while she held off the monsters. She was wounded and tired, and she didn't want to live like a hunted animal. The satyr didn't want to leave her, but he couldn't change her mind, and he had to protect the others, so Thalia made her final stand alone, at the top of that hill. As she died, Zeus took pity on her. He turned her into that pine tree. Her spirit still helps protect the borders of the valley. That's why the hill is called Half-Blood Hill." Naruto watched Percy stare at the tree in the distance, deep in thought, and narrowed his eyes at what he thought Percy might be thinking, especially when he saw a sad glint in his eyes. "Percy, you can't change what has already happened. Only strive to make sure it never happens again in the future," Naruto told him as he placed his hand on his shoulder. He received a nod in understanding from Percy and Grover, who also took the words to heart as well. "Grover, have heroes really gone on quests to the underworld?" Percy asked, turning to them. "Sometimes," Grover said. "Orpheus, Hercules, Houdini." "And have they ever returned someone from the dead?" he asked. "No, never." Orpheus came close. "Percy, you're not seriously thinking?" Grover began. "No," Percy said. "I was just wondering. So a satyr is always assigned to guard a demigod?" Grover studied him warily, and Naruto narrowed his eyes at him, already knowing Percy was planning something to do with his mother. "Not always. We go undercover to a lot of schools. We try to sniff out the half-bloods who have the makings of great heroes. If we find one with a very strong aura, like a child of the big three, we alert Chiron. He tries to keep an eye on them, since they could cause really huge problems," Grover said. "And you found me and Naruto. Chiron said you thought we might be something special," Percy said. Grover looked as if he had been led into a trap. "I didn't." "Oh, listen, don't think like that. If either one of you were, you know you'd never ever be allowed a quest, and if you don't, Percy, I'd never get my license. You're probably both children of Hermes, or maybe even one of the minor gods or goddesses, like Nemesis, the god of revenge, or Hecate, the goddess of magic. Don't worry, okay?" Naruto could tell that he was trying to reassure himself more than him or Percy. That night after dinner, there was a lot more excitement than usual. At last, it was time for Capture the Flag. When the plates were cleared away, the gong horn sounded and we all stood at our tables. Campers yelled and cheered as Annabeth and two of her siblings ran into the pavilion carrying a silk banner. It was about 10 feet long, glistening gray, with a picture of a barn owl above an olive tree. From the opposite side of the pavilion, Clarice and her siblings ran in with another banner, of identical size, but blood red, with a picture of a bloody spear and boar's head. Naruto and Percy turned to look. "So those are the flags?" Naruto asked him. "Yeah," Luke said. "Do Ares and Athena always lead teams?" Percy asked. "Not always," he said, "but often." "So if another cabin captures one, what do you do?" "Repaint the flag," Percy asked. Luke grinned. "You'll see, but first we have to get one." "Whose side are we on?" Naruto asked. but he had an idea of which one based off of what Annabeth said earlier in the week. Luke gave Percy a sly look, and Naruto knew right then whose team they were on, and had an inkling of the plan they had. We've made a temporary alliance with Athena. Tonight, we get the flag from Ares, and you Percy are going to help, Luke said. The teams were announced. Athena had made an alliance with Apollo and Hermes, the two biggest cabins. Apparently, privileges had been traded: shower times, chore schedules, the best slots for activities in order to win support. Ares had allied themselves with everybody else: Dionysus, Demeter, Aphrodite, and Hephaestus. From what Naruto could tell, the Dionysus kids were actually good athletes, but there were only two of them. Demeter's kids at the edge with nature skills and outdoor stuff, but they weren't very aggressive. Aphrodite's sons and daughters Naruto wasn't too worried about except for Silena. They mostly sat out every activity and checked the reflections in any reflective surface and did their hair and gazipped. Hephaestus's kids could be a problem, but there were only 4 of them. That of course left Ares' cabin, a dozen of the biggest, meanest kids on Long Island. Chiron hammered his hoof on the marble floor. Heroes, he announced. You know the rules. The creek is the boundary line, the entire forest is fair game, all magical items are allowed, the banner must be prominently displayed and have no more than 2 guards, prisoners may be disarmed but may not be bound, no killing or maiming is allowed. I will serve as referee and battlefield medic, arm yourselves. He spread his hands, and the tables were suddenly covered with equipment: helmets, bronze swords, spears, oxhide shields coated in metal. Naruto grabbed some leather armor but no helmet. Instead he put a blue armband around his upper arm, and he watched as Percy freaked out a little for a few seconds. Heroes, before you move out, we have a new piece of equipment made by the Hephaestus cabin, that was thought up by our new camper Naruto, Chiron said, then held up a shiny bronze low-frequency two-way radio. As you can see, this is a low-frequency two-way radio with the casing made out of celestial bronze. The idea is that the bronze will stop the hardware from giving away a demigod's location to monsters out in the field, Chiron said, and everyone, especially the Athena campers, looked at Naruto in shock, imagining the advantages they would gain if it worked. There are enough here for all the campers to have, with the 2 team leaders having one that can change to other frequencies to give orders to their team. Tonight will be a test run on them, with myself and the monsters stalked in the woods as our indicators of whether they work or not, Chiron said, allowing it to sink in for a second, before giving out the radio earpieces to the campers. Tomorrow morning all campers will hand in a report on how well they think the radios worked, and whether they were attacked by more monsters than usual during the game. I myself will also hand in a report on whether I could sense you better during the game or not. All these reports will be handed in to Naruto so that he can go over them and make the necessary changes to them with the help of the Hephaestus cabin members, Chiron said, finishing up. Now get to your positions, the game will begin soon, Chiron said. Blue team forward, Annabeth yelled. Everyone cheered and banged their swords on their shields as they moved forward to their side of the creek. Naruto noticed Percy and Annabeth talking, and approached Annabeth after she had moved away from Percy. This plan of yours wouldn't happen to be a diversion with Percy as bait, would it? Naruto asked her innocently. Annabeth looked nervous for a second. How did you figure that out? She asked. Oh, don't worry. I won't interfere with your plan, Annabeth. I was just making sure so I know where to be to make sure Clarice doesn't maim him too bad, Naruto said, causing Annabeth to relax a little. Oh, okay. Well, we put him on border patrol off to the side over there. I had Luke show him where to be, Annabeth said, pointing off to the far side of the creek. Naruto noted that it was far enough away to keep Clarice from interfering if she realized it was eye trick. Naruto nodded to Annabeth and headed off in that direction to find a good place to keep an eye on Percy from, and snipe off people with his bow and arrow, if Clarice took it too far. Naruto had just found a spot in a tree that was concealed enough to keep him hidden, and gave him a perfect view of the small clearing by the creek that Percy was in when he heard the conch horn blow. Suddenly there was a flurry of activity and Naruto saw a blue team camper shoot past Percy and across the creek into enemy territory. Naruto narrowed his eyes when he saw Percy tense up and look around him. He scanned the area of woods around Percy, but couldn't see anything and so relaxed. Clarice and her friends suddenly burst through the clearing. "Green the punk!" Clarice shouted. As they began attacking Percy, Naruto again checked the woods around the clearing and saw Silena a few feet in, being a lookout for Clarice. Soon Naruto saw Clarice's spear get broken by Percy, and saw her suddenly charge him with her friends. Naruto acted then and fired off just enough arrows to pin her 5 friends to the trees behind them. He then watched them fight, but noticed at the same time Clara stood Luke crossing the creek with the red team's flag. Naruto then jumped out of the tree and reached the clearing just in time to hear the end of her rant and see Annabeth materialize next to Percy and them begin talking. Naruto walked over to Clarice, who was fuming and ranting. "Relax, Clarice," he told her. "Relax, relax. How am I supposed to relax when that worm broke my spear and ruined my reputation?" She fumed at him. "Well, I can fix your spirits as easy as fixing a arrow. As for your reputation, you just have to build it back up. So relax," Naruto said to her, causing her to look at him. Okay, I'm calm. "So you can fix my spear?" Clarice said, calming down. "Of course I can," Naruto said, taking the spear from her and putting it on her back. "Okay, but if you," she began before Hal ripped through the forest. The campers cheering died instantly. "Stand ready, my bow!" Chiron shouted in ancient Greek. Naruto drew his own bow and nocked an arrow. There on a rock right above Percy and Annabeth's head, was a black hound the size of a rhino. Naruto recognized it was a hellhound. It was staring straight at Percy. Nobody moved except Annabeth, who yelled, "Percy, run!" Right as the hellhound jumped from the rock, a giant orange blur the same size as the hellhound crashed into it, knocking it onto its side several feet away with 4 gashes running down its side. Naruto recognized the blur as Kurama. Everyone watched as the fox then pounced onto the hound, sinking its fangs into its neck and twisting, causing its neck to snap. As it burst into golden dust, Kurama changed back to his regular size and jumped onto Naruto's shoulder. "Good job, Kurama, you'll get a reward tonight for that," Naruto said, getting a happy from the fox. "The Immortals," Annabeth said. "That's a hellhound from the Fields of Punishment." They're not supposed to. "Somebody summoned it," Chiron said. "Somebody inside the camp." Naruto immediately zoned everyone out. He was trying to figure out who could have done it. He even missed Luke walking up, and Clara's shout blaming it on Percy. Naruto then heard a gasp and looked towards Percy and saw a glowing trident above his head. He got a grim look on his face as he and everyone else bowed. "It is determined," Chiron announced. "My father?" he heard Percy ask, completely bewildered. "Poseidon," Chiron said. "Earthshaker, Stormbringer, father of horses. Hail Perseus Jackson, son of the sea god." "Hail Perseus Jackson," everyone toned before standing up. Naruto looked at Percy to see he was still completely confused. Then suddenly Naruto was enveloped in a silver glow the same color and brilliance as what surrounded Cabin 8 at night. Then fire suddenly swirled around Naruto's feet, dancing around him in flickers. Then a symbol of an owl holding an olive branch appeared above Naruto's head. Everyone gasped, and Naruto saw Annabeth's eyes widen. "It is determined," Chiron announced, but nobody bowed this time. They were too amazed. "Athena," Chiron said, "goddess of wisdom and battle." He then went on. "Hestia," he said, "goddess of the hearth, fire, and family." He said one more. "Artemis," he said, "goddess of archery, the moon, wilderness, virginity, and the hunt." "Hail Naruto Namikaze, son of the 3 virgin goddesses." Everyone got over their shock and quickly bowed, intoning, "Hail Naruto Namikaze." They then all stood and started whispering amongst themselves. "Quit," Chiron shouted. "Discussion of these claimings will have to wait till tomorrow. Every to bed." "Annabeth, could you show Percy to cabin 3?" he asked her. She nodded and told Percy to follow her. Chiron then turned to Naruto, but before he could say anything they heard a noise out towards the cabins. Everyone looked to see that a cabin had appeared in the center of the cabins with an overhang hanging over the central hearth of the camp. Naruto noticed that the base of the cabin was designed to look like a hearth. The walls were a charcoal gray with magical flickering flame designs. The roof was white with gray and black swirls in it that Naruto realized symbolized smoke. On the marble columns holding up the hearth overhang were 2 sconces, one on each side, that had actual Greek fire burning in them. Above the door of the cabin was Hestia's name instead of a number. "Well, I was going to say you had the choice of 2 cabins, Naruto, but it appears one of your mothers wanted you to have a 3rd choice," Chiron said, turning to him. "Well, sir, I believe I will use Hestia's cabin as my main cabin, with me staying in cabin 8 and 6 every now and then, so I can get to know my siblings in cabin 6. I also promise not to use cabin 8 whenever the hunters come around." but I would also like to have a look at cabin 8 and 6 before I turn in for the night," Naruto said, getting a nod from Chiron. "Very well then, I know you can find your way around without help, so I will leave you to explore your cabins," Chiron said before walking off back to the big house. Naruto immediately headed off towards cabin 8. He wanted to get the empty one of the two cabins he was visiting over with first. As he got closer to the cabin, Naruto started to feel the same pull again that he felt when they were going to the dining pavilion at second night. When he reached the cabin, Naruto first admired the outside of it. The walls were a light silver color with designs of many forests, mountains, and animals decorating them. The roof was an inky black color with twinkling silver star designs in the shape of constellations all over it. When he went inside the cabin, he saw numerous beds lining both walls with names on the headboards that he assumed were the names of the current hunters. At the far wall he saw a door with his name embroidered on it in sleek silver script. It looked like it had just been added recently. He smiled at the thought that his mother Artemis would add him his own room to the cabin for when he stayed there. He immediately moved towards the door and opened it to see what his room looked like. The first thing he noticed in his room was a queen-size bed with silver-colored silk sheets. Then he noticed a dresser big enough for his clothes and anything else he might have wanted to put into it. Then he noticed on the other wall a display case with a note inside. He also noticed his horn from the minotaur inside it, and saw that it had been turned into a hunter's horn with silver animal designs on it and a string to sling it over his shoulder with. Naruto walked over to the case and opened it, grabbing the note and the horn. He then opened the note and began reading it. "To my dearest Naruto, I know what a shock it must be for you to find out you the son of the 3 virgin goddesses, but I want you to know without a doubt that we all love you. This room is for you if you decide to use it, as you have more of a right to use it than even my hunters do. The display case is for your spoils of war, all except for the horn you're probably holding right now. I want you to keep that horn close and take it with you if you ever go on any quests. Just blow into the horn if you ever find yourself in trouble and help will come. I love you, my son. Your loving mother, Artemis." When Naruto finished reading the letter, he had a small genuine smile on his face. "Thank you, mother, for this room and for letting me know you love me. I promise to make you and my other moms proud." Naruto prayed to his mother with his head bowed. He then slid the note into his pants pocket and slung the horn over his shoulder. He took one last look around his room, then left it in the cabin, heading over to cabin 6, where he saw Annabeth waiting on the steps. "Why didn't I see that you could be one of my brothers before?" Annabeth asked him when he reached her, then gave him a hug. "There's just too much of a difference in me to be immediately spotted, Annabeth. I mean, I have 2 other goddesses for mothers as well," he said, returning the hug. "Well then, better late than never. Welcome to cabin 6, brother," Annabeth said with a warm smile on her face as she let him inside. "Good to be here, sister," Naruto said as he followed her inside. He immediately noticed a difference in this cabin compared to cabin 8. For one, there were about a dozen kids using the cabin. Another thing he noticed was that there wasn't any one color prominently represented for Athena's cabin, but there were many carvings of owls on the walls and even a small statue of Athena. There was even a small room that was a library full of books written in ancient Greek. After he was done looking around, he turned back to Annabeth. "Everyone, this is Naruto, our new half-brother," Annabeth stated. Everyone waved, then introduced themselves. "So Naruto, besides your one gray eye, what other features do you think you got from our mom?" Malcolm, a boy around his age and second in command of the Athena cabin, asked. "Well, I do have a photographic memory, and I'm good at figuring out people's skills and how to work those skills together into a team," Naruto said, earning a nod from Malcolm and Annabeth. "That sounds like traits from mom, all right," Malcolm said. After that, Naruto spent a little while longer getting to know his siblings better before giving Annabeth a hug and leaving to go to Hestia's cabin. As he was leaving, he prayed to Athena. "Thank you, Mom. I love all my siblings." When he approached Hestia's cabin, he noticed a gentle warmth coming from it and smiled. He then went inside to see a central hearth inside the cabin as well as the one outside it. He noticed there were a dozen beds here as well. But he saw another door at the back of this cabin as well that had his name on it in flame script. He smiled and opened the door to see another queen-sized bed, but this one had burnt orange silk sheets. There was a dresser here as well, but in the place of a display case on the other wall was a mirror. He noticed that a box with a bow tied to it was on the bed with a note on top. He took the note and read it. "To my wonderful son Naruto, I had a feeling you wouldn't be able to choose a cabin out of Artemis and Athena, so I made this one for you. I know what Artemis's letter said and it goes double for me and Athena. The box is a present from all of us. We knew you would have pyrokinesis for me, so we made you some fire-resistant clothes. And don't worry, your hat and necklace are fire-resistant as well. I hope you love them. Your loving mom, Hestia. P.S. Your closet has other versions of this outfit for you. Naruto smiled another genuine smile and prayed, "Thank you, Mom. I know I will love the cloth no matter what because it came from you three. I love all three of you." He then opened the box and pulled out the cloth. There was a pair of camouflage pants, combat boots, a loose black shirt with this design on the front, and a camouflage trench coat. Naruto smiled at the outfit and folded it, laying it on his dresser to wear the next day. He slid into bed and went to sleep feeling content knowing he is loved by his mothers. Mount Olympus. At the beginning of the chapter, the flag came in Artemis's temple on Mount Olympus. Hestia, Athena, and Artemis could be seen surrounded by Artemis's hunters watching a magical viewing screen. "My lady, why are we watching that camp?" one of Artemis's hunters asked. "You will see, Zoe, just wait," Artemis said to her, and Zoe could see a glint of happiness in her lady's eye. "Are you sure now will be the right time to do it?" Hestia asked the other two goddesses, being mindful of the hunters and not saying exactly what she was asking about. "Yes, now is a perfect time, Hestia. We will wait till the end of the game to do it though," Athena said, her voice low enough that the hunters couldn't hear her even with their keener hearing. They then saw the campers getting ready to begin the game, and heard Chiron mention Naruto's invention and the test phase for it. Every one of the hunters and the goddesses were shocked at the invention, some thinking it wouldn't work, while Athena could be heard mumbling to herself about how she couldn't believe she didn't think of it. Then she started smiling along with the other two goddesses when they remembered it was Naruto who came up with it. They then watched the game with the focus on Naruto. The hunters were curious why it was focusing on this boy. None of them recognized him as being there before. The goddesses smiled as they watched him basically help two of his friends at the same time, while the hunters were confused why he wasn't helping his teammate until it was explained to them. Then they looked at the boy in a new light. Then they saw him shoot 5 arrows in a matter of seconds to pin the 5 other people in the clearing when it looked like the boy's teammate was going to get pummeled by them. The hunters were shocked at the boy's accuracy and speed with a bow. He was even better than some of them. Artemis just smiled in pride at his abilities with her favorite weapon. When the game ended and they saw him walk up to the girl they recognized as Clarice and offer to fix her spear, it was Hestia's turn to smile proudly. The hunters were even impressed a little with him. To offer to help a person who was just her enemy a moment ago was a very noble thing to do. Then they watched the Hellhound attack and saw how calm he had been through the event. They were all shocked when Percy had been claimed by Poseidon. "Well, it seems that Hades is now the only one to not have broke his oath," Hestia said. "And he didn't even want to take the oath in the first place," Athena said. "I respect him for sticking to it even though he didn't want to," Artemis said, with the hunters nodding along with her. Then the 3 goddesses nodded and stuck their hands together, causing a light to shoot into the viewing screen and encompass the boy they had been watching the entire game. The hunters all gasped as they realized what this meant, and knew that this is why they had been watching. They all heard Chiron state his claiming and name Naruto Namikaze and were confused when he said he was the child of all 3 goddesses. They then heard the boy state where he was going to be sleeping after Hestia's cabin had appeared. They were glad when they heard he would respect the hunters and not stay in cabin 6 when they were at the camp. Then the viewing screen vanished and the hunters turned to the goddesses. "My lady, please explain to us what just happened?" Zoe asked. Artemis nodded and began explaining everything pertaining to Naruto's birth to them, with Hestia and Athena helping to clarify some points. She explained how they met his father, how they found him again many years later fatally wounded, how they granted his last wish for a family after his death in the form of Naruto, then how they left him at the new demigod orphanage to be raised. After the explanation, the hunters all had looks of understanding on their faces. "We understand why he was born, no, my lady. But don't expect us to like him right away. We will remain neutral to him until he proves himself to us to be one of the few good men in the world," Zoe stated, getting nods of agreement from the other hunters. Artemis had a relieved look on her face at Zoe's statement and said, "That's all I ask of from you girls, is to give him a chance." The hunters all nodded to her, then were dismissed to their rooms. "Well, that went better than expected," Artemis said as she reopened the viewing portal to see Naruto outside her cabin. Yes, it did. And it seems Naruto is going to view your cabin first, Athena said, causing a smile to appear on Artemis's face. They watched him check out the cabin, and saw the small smile Naruto had appear on his face. They then smiled gently at him as they heard his prayer to Artemis. You already have. Hestia whispered out loud, getting agreeing nods from the other two goddesses. Athena then grinned as she saw him approaching her cabin. They all smiled as they watched him interact with his siblings from Athena. When they heard what he had gained from Athena, the other two smiled knowingly as she smiled proudly. They then smiled gently again as they heard his prayer to Athena. I'm sure they already love you too, Naruto. Athena whispered, this time also getting agreeing nods from the other two. They then saw Naruto head to Hestia's cabin and said Goddess smiled at the fact he was staying in her cabin. They watched as he looked around the cabin, familiarizing himself with it. Then they saw him walk to the room meant for him, and they all laughed at the familiarity it had to the room Artemis had made for him in her cabin. They watched as he found the gift they left for him and watched him smile after reading the note. They began smiling when they saw how much he liked the cloth. They began crying a little when they heard his prayer to Hestia. We love you to our angel of a son. They all said at the same time. They then watched as he fell asleep with a content smile on his face. I hope you all liked the video. And if you all want the next part of this video, please like the video and comment 3 hearts. Please subscribe to my channel so whenever I upload a video you will notify.